Welcome to Very Big Ventures, where bold ideas and the people behind them take center stage. Because very big ventures don't start big, they start with a spark, a frustration, a moment when someone decides this matters. From personal dreams, entrepreneurial leaps, to reluctant leaders who never planned to build something big. And every journey may begin small, but the journey changes the person. And we're here to explore it. My name is Taj Adhav, the founder of LeaseCake, and I'm fascinated by the moment when someone decides to build something bigger than themselves. And on this show, we go beyond the headlines into the doubt, the risk, the turning points, and the very big visions that are still unfolding. This is Very Big Ventures. Let's begin. And on today's show, we're joined by the co-founder of 825 Ventures, a family-led restaurant company that was founded in 2023 by he and his brother and their father. Family is at the heart of the business, and even the company's name, 825, represents something special, which I'm sure our guest will share. The story is one of true entrepreneurial grit, and with his dad starting as a Domino's pizza delivery driver to building and eventually owning and operating over 100 restaurants. And today, the family owns and operates 24 Jersey Mike's Subs locations across Minnesota. They're a LeaseCake customer. They're expanding into Wisconsin, and they recently became the first franchise group to sign a development agreement with Mike's Red Tacos for the entire state. Welcome, Kavrin McGuire.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. You know, Kavrin, you are such an inspiring leader, kind of young next generation, kind of the torch is being passed to you. But for listeners that are meeting you for the first time, how do you describe 825 Ventures and what your family's building?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. 825 Ventures is something that was created by my father and along with myself and my younger brother, Dylan. The name 825 is derived from my birthday being on the 8th. And my brother's birthday being on the 25th of October. So my dad came up with the idea, and that's where the origin of the name came from. But for us, the journey's been awesome because it's one rooted in working with your family. The connections that we have with the people that are on our team. It's something super special, and being able to see the journey alongside, your brother, your dad, and people that have been with our company now for, 15, 20 years is something super special.
That's awesome. And your dad, Michael McGuire, he's got an incredible background in the industry, obviously. What was his story, and what do people need to understand about how he got started? Share with us.
Yeah. So my dad, he's been in the restaurant industry for over 30 years now. He's still very active in the restaurant industry. He likes to hop on the slicer every once in a while now with Jersey Mike's. But looking back 30 years, he started off as a Domino's pizza driver. Before joining Domino's, he was in the military. He either had the option once he finished his service to either go to college or, pursue a career in the restaurant business. And he had a conversation with my grandpa. He tells us the story all the time, but my grandpa basically was asking him, what's next, Mike? You're out of the military. You don't like school. You're working at Domino's. What's your next thing? What are you doing? What are you doing with your life ultimately? And my dad looked at him and he said, well, you're not going to like this, but I'm going to be rich, but I'm not going to school. And my grandpa was a John Deere factory worker. He'd stay overtime, he'd stay extra time, just for the extra 50 cents, extra dollar, extremely hardworking blue collar in Iowa. And, my dad didn't really care for school too much. And he wanted to kind of forge his own path. And so he started off as a Domino's delivery driver, ultimately worked his way through management, found his way to Krispy Kreme Donuts in Michigan, where he was an operating partner. And then from there, he transitioned to Little Caesars and then, most recently Jersey Mike's Subs. So he's held every role in restaurant industries from, high level corporate to franchising to like I alluded to, ground floor delivery driving. So
Unbelievable. Well, he probably learned a ton within franchising. I mean, that work ethic, how did it get translated to you as a young kid watching, your dad doing what he's doing? Like, was it direct advice, or was it just you were observing and seeing what passion and ambition is all about?
yeah, I think it was a combination of both. My dad he's always been a great teacher to myself and my brother. Always wanted to show us just kind of the inner workings of the franchise business. But a lot of it was through observation. Just seeing, as a kid, he'd be there late at work, he'd be there early. It was one of those things where he was constantly working. He was always in the restaurant. And as we continued to see the growth of restaurants, it was really cool to see his work ethic, even at a young age. Just being able to observe that is something that I think really has helped myself and my brother in the long term, because we understand the work that's needed to build, multiple restaurants at scale.
But it sounds like he was enjoying it. I mean, not just working to grind his knuckles down and, you know?
Absolutely. No, absolutely loves restaurants, loves everything from, being in the back of the house, with Little Caesars, making the pizzas, to the front of the house aspect of the hospitality, creating a restaurant in an atmosphere where customers feel like, they can enjoy the food, enjoy the atmosphere. He absolutely loves restaurants, and his passions for restaurants really, pushed off onto me and my brother.
Nice. What what was the moment in time that changed you or the family? Like, what was the particular turning point in his career that changed that trajectory? Is there anything you can put your finger on?
Yeah, I think in 2006 we moved from Michigan to Minnesota. He had the opportunity with a business partner to open up the first Little Caesars, or the Little Caesars reboot, back here in Minnesota. And so we started off in 2006 with our first Little Caesars opening at St. Paul. And then from there, they continued to scale Little Caesars from 2006 to 2012. And in 2012, he became one of the, first 4 or 5 franchisees of Jersey Mike's in Minnesota. And, I think that's when things really started to take a turn for us, because that's when we went from, one brand to multi-brand. And obviously, as you know, operations with 2 different brands are completely separate, and they're different, but you can learn a lot through, multi-unit and multi-brand concepts.
Got it. Did your perspective of entrepreneurship change uh, through this journey? Because I mean, you got influenced at a very young age.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't necessarily say my perception changed, but it definitely further piqued my interest, because I saw the impact that you can make while franchising. I think, when you're working in the restaurants, you're dealing with people from all different kinds of walks of life, right? You have people that it's their first job, they're in high school and they can only work, part times at night. And you have, full-time people, whether they have a full family or they might have a rough background. You're dealing with just such a broad scope of people, and just through pure hard work, you're able to provide just so many different opportunities for people, whether that's, helping people buy their first car, or helping them, save enough money to go to college, or, there's a lot of different stories like that ultimately really piqued my interest into this business.
And what do you think people typically underestimate when they say, "Hey, Karen, I'm going to get in the restaurant business"? What do
Yeah,
they completely miss?
no, I think a lot of people's perception is, you turn the key and these things make money themselves and you can walk away. And that could be the furthest thing from true, because, when I initially joined on, with my dad and wanted to take this adventure with him, He told me that we're open 363 days a year. Someone's in the restaurant at 7 a.m. Someone's in the restaurant until 11 p.m. and they don't think you have a day off. And so if you're able to truly embrace the 24/7 nature of this business, you can do extremely well. But if that's something that's fearful and something that you don't want to embrace, then this isn't going to be for you. Because if the bread oven here at Jersey Mike's goes down before we open, the customer doesn't care, right? They want Jersey Mike subs. So you're going to have to figure out, what are we going to do, right? And same thing with, a larger catering order for Target, right? If Target's ordering subs for Thanksgiving Day for their employees, or Black Friday, somebody needs to be there to make the subs. And so I think for me, just understanding that this is a nonstop business. It's go, go, go. I think people really don't truly understand that aspect of restaurants. I think a lot of times the perception is, these things can just open up, they'll make money, and you'll be good to go. And like I said, that's the furthest from the truth.
Yeah, you'll be good to go. I don't know what the restaurant failure rate is, but in franchising, it's a lot less, because there's a whole playbook, and they do a really good job in selecting the multi-unit franchisees that come aboard. In fact, you and I met, I think, at the large National Jersey Mike's convention, right after Blackstone acquired.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I think our first meeting was probably 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, at the national conference.
Yeah, it's amazing how time flies, and even the growth today from where they were. I mean, I don't know what the unit count is across all their locations. Was it?
We're close to 3,400.
I was gonna say, fantastic. So we're gonna transition from your dad to kind of you and your work ethic and your vision and inspiring people. But what was the one piece of advice that your dad, did he ever sit you down and say, Kavrin, I want you to never, ever, ever forget this? Was there any one?
Yeah, for sure. I think, obviously I alluded to the someone always be in the restaurant. I think that was, one of the more important pieces of advice. But just growing up every single day, before he would drop my brother and I off to school, he'd always tell us, listen, show respect, and be the leader. And I think, that's something that I carry with me every single day. It's important to always listen to your peers, listen to your team members, your crew members, your shift leads, whatever it might be. Ultimately showing respect for me is obviously treating people the way that you want to be treated, and being the leader. I think for me, the biggest thing is the speed of the leader is the pace of the pack, right? And that's a quote that I live my life by. I never ask people in our restaurants to do something that I wouldn't do, whether it's, cleaning the toilets, taking out the trash. It doesn't matter to me. I really don't care. I can do anything that anybody, I would ask anybody to do. So just having that ingrained in my brain from a very young age, of just listen, show respect, be the leader. That's something that I live day to day by, for sure.
Nice. I do like that quote. The speed of the leader is the pace of the pack. That almost sounds like a Minnesota dog sledding.
No, definitely. It's like, if you're running and you're at the front of the pack, then, the rest of the people on your team, the rest of the people behind you are going to run. And if you're ultimately, walking, crawling, taking things slow, then that's going to be the pace of the pack. And for me, it's one speed. It's continuously going. And, I hope and I expect our people to follow that pace.
Yeah. Were there anything that you learned in school that reinforced obviously you've got very innate, natural, personal skills or people-based skills, right? You have very high EQ. Was there anything you learned in school that started to pique your interest on kind of management?
Yeah, I think I went to the University of Iowa, where I studied economics and management. And so being able to take the, like the IQ portion of learning and really being able to blend it with the EQ portion, is something that I think has helped me out tremendously. Because obviously, we're in the people business. We just happen to make some really good sandwiches, but ultimately there is a business component to it too. And understanding that, you do have different metrics that you have to hit. You do have, revenue goals you have to hit. There are labor percentages and stuff that you obviously aim for. So I think a combination of both of those things has really helped out.
That's really good to hear. A lot of people feel that, oh, it's management's just textbooks. But I think end of the day, in any business that you're in, whether it's restaurants, you're building a sub empire, or even a technology company, right? We are in the people business, right? We're a technology company, but end of the day, people buy from people they like and they trust doing business with. So that's invaluable. How about let's turn the tables here. Is there any piece of advice you ever gave your dad or your brother?
Yeah, no, I think one of the things working with my dad, that's been great is just our relationship to be able to have very open conversations and being able to have very hard conversations at times, especially early in my leadership journey. It was one of those things where, I was the new guy coming into the business. I really didn't know much about anything, honestly. But I knew the way that the workforce was trending. Obviously being in the restaurant industry for 30 years, my dad has certain ways that he likes things to be done, right? Whether that's through, scheduling stuff or operational items. And so for me, being able to bring in a new perspective on, hey, this is how the workforce is today, right? I understand that maybe 30 years ago, this is how things were done, but this isn't how things always have to be done, right? And for me, it's not necessarily one piece of advice I've been able to provide him, but our ability to continuously have those open conversations, because ultimately the restaurant industry is one that hasn't really changed much over the last, 15, 20, 30 years, right? I think you see all these other industries adapting to technology and, changing the way that they do business. And restaurants have been pretty much the same. I think it's one of those things where now, more than ever, of course, we're seeing a lot of development in the restaurant industry. And I think we're catching up on a lot of things that other industries might already have implemented. But for me, I think being able to have those conversations and tell my dad, hey, what you've been doing has been great. But I think for us to continue to stay ahead of the curve, we're going to have to make different moves, different transitions. That's been really helpful for our long-term success.
Great. So that's the transition then to you really becoming a leader to help shape the future of the company.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, he's given me a lot of autonomy now at this point. Everything from a day-to-day operations standpoint, is something that I oversee ultimately. And that was developed through, the last 3 or 4 years of just obviously trusting, him trusting me has been the real thing, and trusting my vision and understanding that, the work that ultimately I'm trying to put in, it is, I would like to think is working. But it's one of those things where his belief in me has been something that has really been able to also propel, my journey for sure.
Wow, that's good to hear. So I'll ask a question as it relates to being a son in a family-run business. My parents wanted me to become a CPA for the longest time, so I could join their business, laser technology company. Ended up never working for my parents, despite their success, and I've kind of found my own journey. But how do you earn the credibility among your team members, knowing that, hey, it's your dad's baby. Yeah, Kavrin, you're taking over. But how do you make certain that they don't feel like they're working for you, but they're working with you?
Absolutely. I think that was one of the hardest barriers to entry when I first graduated college, because you're coming in, you don't know anything, in terms of the way the day-to-day operations work. He had people working with him, whether it was general managers or director of operations for, 10, 15, 20 years. And the first thing that, I really wanted to make a point was earning their trust and earning their respect. And that was important for me, because I knew that if I didn't get their buy-in, nothing else was going to matter, and so that was long, long hours inside the restaurant, studying everything from understanding, how much 3 pieces of cheese weighed at Jersey Mike's, understanding, how to place vendor orders, knowing how to open the restaurant, knowing how to close the restaurant, becoming a general manager, becoming a shift leader, really embracing everything about the restaurant was super important for me. And then, once I earned their trust and their respect, it was easier for me to make decisions because I knew that I had conviction in my decision making, but I knew that everyone else also believed in the decisions I was making. And then, through that process, I was able to earn the trust and respect of the people that were working inside the restaurant. And that's something that you really can't do unless you truly do the work. And
Right.
that's exactly what I had to do.
Oh, wow. All right. I'm going to put you on the spot because you
Okay.
brought it up. How much do 3 slices of cheese weigh?
1.2 ounces and 3 slices of ham weigh 1.8. So
Wow. This guy knows his food costs. That's freaking
hey,
awesome.
we're trying around here for sure. So
Uh, we always go off script, and there's no script here on Very Big Ventures. That's pretty funny. Awesome, man. So what's your speed time on completing a sub, right?
I'd like to, it's funny because now people joke and think I don't have it anymore, but whenever there's a G13 competition, for some reason, I tend to find myself in first. So,
Maybe it's because you're competitive, perhaps.
well, and it's funny because if you talk to my brother, he will tell you I'm lying. So, because he has that competitive edge to him as well, which is, I think it brings the fun to work.
Oh my God. Well, next time I'm up in Minneapolis, like we'll go, have a competition, right? You and Dylan
Exactly.
see what the score
Exactly.
is. That's cool. All right. So core values are really important, certainly. What are the top 3 core values that you instill, not just from your family's perspective, but inside the company that everyone knows and feels?
Yeah, I think, for us, life is all about choices. Every single day you have the ability to wake up and make a decision and make a choice on, what you want to do. And for us, our core values are all centered around an acronym called choices. And so, the first, obviously, you start off with the C. It's care about what you do. Because if you don't care about what you do and you don't have a passion for what you do, nothing else matters. The H stands for help each other. We're in the restaurant business. We like to use sports references and analogies, but if one player on the team, messes up, then it can really have a trickle down effect on everybody else. So helping each other out is super important. We believe in open communication. It's one of those things where if you aren't transparent with your messaging, then things can, get lost in the weeds. So having open communication is always important. Integrity always is something that is obviously at the core of everything we do. You have to have integrity in, your day-to-day decision making, and just doing things the right way. The second C is for customer focus. Like I said earlier, we're in the people business. We just happen to make some really good sandwiches and soon to be tacos. But, the customer is at the center of every single thing we do. The customer ultimately takes care of the brand in our leadership team. Our leadership team take care of our team members, our crew, our shift leads and stuff like that. And then they ultimately take care of the customer. So we have, kind of one big circle from the customer focus standpoint. We want to engage in excellence. We want to be the best at every single thing that we do. We joked right there about, slicing a giant Italian, but, I say it jokingly, but we always want to be the best. We always want to finish first in every single thing that we do. And then the last thing in our choices acronym is safety first. Obviously you want to make decisions safely, whether you're on the slicer, or even just thinking of the long-term safety of the company, that's important for us too. So from a core value standpoint, that's something that we live by, and we preach to our teams on a daily basis.
Wow. Choices. I like that a lot. I like that a lot. And you have choices as to which franchisor brand to bring in. Franchisors have choices as to who to bring in to their growing portfolio. What have you learned as it relates to you've got 24 Jersey Mikes, right, at last count.
Yeah.
Uh, what does it take to make sure that your team really understands the multi-unit operation, unit level economics? Like, how do you share that information out so everything's optimized?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of internal systems that we use and we rely heavily on. I think Jersey Mike's does a great job at providing recommended tech stack. And we do embrace a lot of those. I think, we've embraced some maybe more than others, but it's one of those where at scale, our goal ultimately with 24 locations, we have one location in, Minneapolis, and then the furthest location's 2.5 hours south, almost an island. And for us, we want to ensure that the customer experience, the customer's product, everything is uniform. And obviously, at a franchise level, that's easier to do than say a mom and pop or something that you created on your own, because Jersey Mike's does have systems to follow. But a combination of the systems provided by corporate, some of the internal items that we have, ultimately help us create that uniformity across the entire state and all of our locations.
Right. Okay. And then from a technology perspective, obviously you're scaling up and you're growing. Give us some examples that have
Yeah,
helped you.
of course, we use Zenput, Harry. Those are two, platforms that have really helped us at scale. Recently, Leasecake has become one of our components in our tech stack. I think for us, that's important because as we continue to scale our operation, it's impossible unless you have, a super genius on Excel to know when, certain renewal periods are coming up on your leases. Obviously some of our stores are 10 years old, some of them are, 10 months old. And being able to really know, all the components of the lease agreements is super important for us. And then, like I said, Zenput, Harry, our internal email communications, our weekly newsletters that we do internally. I think a combination of all of those allows us to send out consistent messaging to all of our stores, which ultimately helps create, the consistency across 24 locations.
Nice. Nice. Um, so we talked about culture, your core values. How do you ensure that it sustains? Because I mean, like, how many employees do you have? Rough numbers.
A little over 400.
Okay. So like that's been a challenge, I'm sure, but certainly you have a model that works. What's the model to go from 24 locations to 36 to 48? And how do you make certain that that culture and that those core values and the leadership stays intact?
Yeah, I mean, you really have to look at yourself internally and surround yourself with people that are like-minded. Everyone on my leadership team, I'd like to think, has the same goals as me, in terms of, we all want to expand, we all want to continue to grow, but ultimately we want to grow the right way. Because if we're going to build, a couple of restaurants in Western Wisconsin, you're looking at 2 or 3 hour drive time from, the core part of the cities here. And so the people are at everything that we do. They have to believe in our core values. They have to have the same long-term vision. And if they don't, then unfortunately they're just not the right persons for our team. And you have to have those hard conversations, and you have to have high velocity in your decision making, because it's one of those things where if somebody isn't the right fit and you allow them to stick around, then ultimately that's going to trickle down to, your crew members, your shift leaders, your assistant managers. So it's one of those things where you have to identify high performing individuals, and bring them along the journey with you, because the minute that you allow a mediocre or low performing individual to stick around too long, that culture can impact, the negative culture impact can be tremendous. And culture is something that takes a very long time to build, but you can lose it in a second. And I've seen it firsthand because, I've lived it, I've seen it. And it's something that, we try to avoid at all costs, because I do think that our culture is something that I take tremendous pride in.
Sure. Yeah. We talk a lot about decision velocity. You said the speed of decision making, and whether it's selecting a new team member, selecting a new site, or selecting a new lease that you need to have renegotiated, or potentially even an early termination. Like, you need to have information and react to it as quickly as possible, because you're not just adding more bodies for the sake of adding more bodies. I'm sure your back office is fairly lean. Is that a correct assumption?
Absolutely. Yeah. We have a lean leadership team. I rely on them tremendously. I can't speak highly enough about, the district managers on our team. They're really the backbone of everything we do, because they ultimately do align with, my belief, my dad's beliefs, my brother's belief. And they are, like I said, they're the backbone of what we do, and they have the same shared goals that we do too.
Wow, good stuff. All right, now you've got the foundation, you've got the playbook for a team and the culture and core values, and you're scaling up. And now you've brought on a whole new brand, which is a very exciting brand, Mike's Red Tacos. Talk about what drew you to that brand, what's exciting about it, and your plans across Minnesota.
Yeah. So this is a perfect segue. I talk about our organization, really the culture fit, right? And when we bring people in, they have to see the same things and same vision that we see. On the flip side, when we're evaluating brands, we want brands that ultimately have the same vision as us as well. And the people and the leadership team also have to align with, ultimately what we're looking for. And we're very fortunate to be able to be approached by, multiple brands constantly. And, we're always entertaining and always looking around. But when, Mike's Red Tacos came and approached us, it was through a friend and a mutual connection that, myself and my dad had. We flew out to San Diego. So at the time, there were only 2 locations.
Andrew
Um,
Fagali,
yeah, Andrew Fagali, yeah.
a good
So my
friend
dad,
and
yeah,
customer. Yeah,
yeah, Andrew Fagali is the best. He's
shout
known
out.
my dad now for, yeah, shout out Andrew Fagali. But yeah, he's known my dad now for quite some time. He is involved in Dave's Hot Chicken, Little Caesars. And through his connection with my dad, said, hey, we have this opportunity down in San Diego. Is this something that would interest you? And just knowing Andrew as a person, we said absolutely, we'll come try it out. We flew to San Diego, met with the founders of Mike's Red Taco, Mike Tolma and his lovely wife, Leona. We got to hear their story about how, they started Mike's Red Tacos out of a food truck in San Diego. They grew it to, 2 brick and mortar locations. And, just hearing their story, seeing the passion that they had for, the concept, and then, ultimately having the opportunity to be, the first franchisee to sign up was something super cool for us. And, the product's great. It's something that on a national scale we haven't seen yet. And I'm excited for that. And then, the people and the leadership team behind the concept is top notch. It's top tier people. They have a wealth of restaurant experience. The people that are behind it, obviously Andrew's behind it. Bill Phelps, who's involved with Dave's Hot Chicken's behind it. And just seeing the playbook that they know works, and wanting to, ultimately replicate it with Mike's is something that we're super excited for.
Great. That is astounding. What's different? Is there supply chain challenges? I mean, because you got a brand new concept, and your first one is targeted open when?
We're hoping by fall of this year. Obviously, everyone listening to this in the restaurant industry understands the challenges of construction and permitting and stuff like that. But we're hoping to have one open here by the end of the year.
Wow, Good deal. That's very, very cool. I mean, it has been getting so much buzz and press. Brand new category. Obviously, I don't know what category you would call it. Obviously, it's a it's tacos, but it's birria, right? Fantastic.
Yep.
Very super tasty.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a high quality birria tacos. The entire menu is based off off the birria concept. It's something that, like I said, it's new. And I mean, if you go around, to some of our competitors, everyone's adding birria to their menu. But ultimately, this is a concept that's focused on that taste. And like I said, it's something that the nation hasn't seen yet. I'm extremely excited for that.
Super cool. Super cool. Proud to have you be kind of the, running and kind of carrying the Mike's Red Tacos in Minnesota. You're the first franchisee. Is that right?
Yes, we are the first signed up franchisee. So we're all in. We got the development rights for the entire state of Minnesota. We believe in the concept. We believe in the people. We believe in the food, and we're excited to bring it to Minnesota.
Oh my gosh. Awesome. All right. What is your perspective on like the future of 825? Just can it continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger, faster and faster, or does a little bit of thoughtful planning come into mind?
Yeah, I think for us, I'm obviously a very ambitious individual, but it's one of those things where we're never going to grow if our foundation isn't rock solid, and that's something that my dad's taught me throughout the years because joining the business, I was pretty eager, and I was like, let's just build restaurants all the time. Why can't we do one a week, right? And obviously, there's a lot of challenges when you start to grow. And for us, we're going to continue to grow. We have a handful of outstanding agreements with Jersey Mike's that we're going to fulfill. We're going to slowly start expanding into Wisconsin. There's a handful of Jersey Mike's territories here in Minnesota. We want to continue to develop. Obviously, we signed 15 Mike's Red Tacos. And for us, it's been a blast. It's so much fun to do what we do. It's so much fun to do what we do with the people that we do it with. And so growth for 825 Ventures is going to continue, but I can promise you we're going to do it the right way for sure.
Nice. Sounds like legacy is a really important part of your family heritage. In any way, are you looking and inspired to create legacies for your other leadership team members? Do they see it the same way?
Absolutely. I alluded to it earlier that, my dad has people that have worked for him for 10, 15, 20 years now. And, for me, joining 6 years ago, just seeing, certain individuals on our team that started off as team members now, working their way through the shift lead, general manager, and are now district managers, being able to create, myself and my brother's core team, and bringing them along the ride with us is something that is super important to me. And I would honestly probably say it's the most important thing because doing the journey is fun, but doing the journey with people that you enjoy being around makes it so much easier.
Wow. That is a great way to wrap up this podcast, Kavrin. I'm so delighted to have you on. This is Very Big Ventures, and you heard it today from Kavrin McGuire. It's a reminder that scale doesn't come first. Courage and persistence and doing it right does. So if there's something in this story that has stayed with you, pay attention to that because the world changes when someone decides to build. I'm Taj Adhav, and this is Very Big Ventures. Thanks so much, Kavrin.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. This has been a blast.